Good afternoon and happy Monday. This is Teresa Rodriguez. I'm the president of BayTran, and we welcome you back to our webinar series, Connecting Our Region. Thank you to our sponsor today, CRG Texas Environmental Services. And as usual, I'm back with our chairman, Carl Joyner. And today our special guest is Andrea French, Executive Director of the Transportation Advocacy Group for Houston, also known as TAG. Welcome, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, it's always timely as we head into a legislative session to bring TAG along and, kind of talk about what you guys are working on. You've done a great job of putting the Houston region on the map in Austin over the past several sessions. And, this is going to be a special session, a redistricting session on top of a new speaker, on top of COVID protocols and, budget impacts. It's a lot. So, Andrea's here to talk about our mutual interest in transportation and infrastructure funding and how we invest. And so we're going to turn over the floor to Andrea, but first, Carl, if you want to say a couple of words.
Well, glad everyone's joining us today. And Andrea, thanks so much for visiting with us today. We really are working hard to see something happen with the coastal spine, the Grand Parkway, the widening of the ship channel. Those are some of the things that we're working with, but we really want to know what you all have planned so that we can work together and hopefully make them become reality. So I'll turn it over to you, Andrea.
So thank you so much for welcoming me today. And I will try to shed some interesting information on the session, but there's still a lot of questions out there. And I always have to laugh because at the beginning of every session, everyone prepares and always says this is going to be a weird one. And I think we finally have actually set the bar for what might be the strangest session ever. So I don't know we can say that anymore going forward. But with that, I think that what we've seen is a lot of flexibility, a lot of grace amongst, kind of all of the advocacy communities, all of the leadership and the elected officials. Not everybody obviously has the same view of how things should be operating, but we are finding our way and everybody is working together. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about TAG's agenda and how we approached the session and why we chose to put together the agenda that we did. Prior to session and leading up to session, there was a lot of conversation about whether it was appropriate, quite frankly, to continue to ask for funding for transportation at a time when many people are, everyone has their hands out. And there are some industry sectors that are probably needing more than transportation at this time, whether it's healthcare or education. And so was it a session to kind of stand down a little bit and say, we're happy with what we have, please don't, we're not going to ask for anything. But by the same token, the other side of that coin is that it was absolutely an opportunity to say, we need to think creatively. This is a time when the policy board has been essentially wiped clean, and we have to come up with some new and creative ideas. And oh, by the way, transportation is absolutely the backbone to much of the other industries that are looking for policy and funding. For example, healthcare, right? Access to healthcare is huge, and transportation mobility are directly linked. And one of the hallmarks of our agenda that we really stayed focused on was the background was that when we invest in transportation, it's not a one-time investment. It's not that we put money out and we see no return. It is about a $3 to $6 on the dollar return of investment for infrastructure investment. And I think it's about for every $1 billion invested in transportation, there's about 13,000 jobs that are supported, created, generated, either directly or indirectly. So that's not insignificant when you're facing a recovery need for an economy. And so that's really been how we launched our conversations with legislators, talking about why we needed to look at continuing investments for transportation. And so you'll see for our agenda, and I'm happy to provide that to Teresa, and she can send that around after if you've not already seen it. We prioritized our top three, which were one, to keep the investments that we have already. And I was on a call earlier today and someone corrected and said, well, we're not going to keep all of the money because the way that things are funded, we've lost some revenue because it's tied to oil and gas severance taxes, right? And with the price of oil falling, we did lose some, but we want to keep those mechanisms, those funding mechanisms from Prop 1 and Prop 7. We don't want to lose, we don't want to go fall back on that or cut from that. So that's number one. Number two, we really strongly tagged last session, led the conversation for identifying a fee structure for alternatively fueled vehicles, mainly electric, but there's others that are in that category, because we feel really strongly that these vehicles are consistently using our infrastructure, but are not paying into the gas tax, which is the primary fund mechanism for how we maintain our roads and bridges and highways. So that's number two. And then number three, we talk about the gas tax. We know that nothing's been done to it since the 90s. It was never indexed to inflation. It hasn't been increased. We're at least asking for an examination of indexing it. And so we know that there has been at least one bill filed that identifies that as an issue and a proposal for a policy change. But that would be our top three. And then beyond that, it is things like safety, looking at programs that support Vision Zero and support TxDOT for their End the Street campaign, and other things that we can support, reduce speed limits that really help not only strengthen our safety for our communities, but strengthen the value of the dollar that we're investing in our infrastructure, because there's a lot of money that goes into repairing after accidents and major emergencies and things like that on our roads. So, and then we also say, we want all the tools in the toolbox. So tolling continues to be an issue. And we remain really supportive of keeping that in the toolbox, especially since for the Houston area, we have a different model than other areas. And so we really believe that it should be left to the local communities to decide what's best for tolling. So I think those are the highlights. Without reading the agenda verbatim, those are the spotlights of our agenda. But again, the conversations really are keeping what we have, and if we can look at different options for funding, like adding a fee for alternatively fueled vehicles, then let's do it. Because while that percentage of income right now is small, and the amount of people that are driving those types of vehicles is small in comparison, it is only projected to grow. And you see that with the car manufacturers really trying to change their fleets to hybrids, electric. I think the industry is going to force it, quite frankly, before some of the policy, community does. So, so that's how we walked up to the agenda. We posted several what we called Legend Learns. And so if anybody had a chance to sit in those, I hope that they were informative. It was an opportunity for us to really talk about transportation and also hear what's important to the legislators, because I think when we're advocating, when we sit with a legislator, it's really important that we talk about what we need from our industry perspective, but that we also have a framework to understand what are their priorities and how does transportation tie in with that. I think that's you have a much more successful approach if you can have it be relatable to things that they're passionate about as well. So it's great. And so while COVID has been tremendously challenging, it's also afforded us an opportunity to be in some ways more connected with our Austin our legislators all over the state, quite frankly, in a much easier way. And so my hope is that when we move out of COVID, we actually could still do some of these because I think it's a great way to stay connected in a huge state where we don't always get to talk with a legislator from El Paso or North Texas. And so now you see TAG looking at the session, which has started, and it's been a little bumpy, meaning, it didn't start with the robustness that other sessions have started. It's a lot of formality, rule changes that happened. The House will convene for one day tomorrow. So it's just a very slow start. Committee assignments, they're looking, will probably not happen until the first week of February, maybe the second. The preference cards that legislators put forward to the speaker to ask for their preference for their committee assignment. That deadline's been extended until January 27th. And so I think you'll see a little bit delay in the committee assignments. That's in the House. The Senate committees have already been decided and presented, and not too drastic of changes there. But in the House, I think everyone's waiting to see who gets kept and who gets shuffled around. So we'll see. And then as far as bills that have been filed for transportation, there have been just the amount of bills has been relatively the same as prior sessions. But transportation has been kind of trickling. It's been a slow trickle, which I appreciate, because I hope that means that everybody's talking to each other and we're not duplicating bills, because we don't want 5 different kinds of the same topic. We really want that work to be done before we file a bill. So, and I also know that there's some larger bills, some omnibus bills that are going to be put out once the committee assignments are completed in the House. And I know in the Senate as well, they're looking to do kind of a large comprehensive package that deals with a couple of different funding issues for transportation. I think that's kind of where we are now. And I really want to hear questions. So I could sit and talk about what I think is important, what I think people want to hear, but I want to hear some questions from everybody so I can help answer those.
Well, I do have some questions, but one just popped in from our friend Larry Bueller in the city of Alvin. TAG and BayTran are working very well together. Are there opportunities for us to keep the regional picture in front of TxDOT, the Transportation Commission, and our state elected officials?
So thank you, Larry. Yes, Larry is no stranger. You're a great advocate, Larry. So thank you. So when we say regional, I think you're saying to stop from just talking about kind of like the major urban cores and talking in a more regional approach. I'm assuming that's what's meant by that question. And I think what's important, we've even had conversations at TAG, because our name is Houston, right? Or TAG Houston region, but a lot of times the word region gets dropped, and it's not intentional. It's just the way that it happens. And we've talked about that, because technically our footprint is 8 counties, and we do work with, you all at BayTran quite extensively. And so and some people just say North Texas and South Texas. And so how do you frame that when you're advocating, because you don't want them to only hear Houston, because the core of Houston is so different than the outlying counties of Houston. And so I think that's a great reminder. I think one of the ways that we do it is, quite frankly, what BayTran and Larry and you all are doing with making sure that, there's a constant presence at the commission meetings. And I was even speaking about how you all really came together for the Grand Parkway conversation, and that is actually the model that really what TxDOT is looking for going forward with respect to tolling, but other issues as well, is to really see that regional collaboration and support. And so I say more of that in any way that we can do it. And so kudos to you all for really launching that. I think that was now 2 summers ago. I can't even, my timeline pre-COVID is a bit fuzzy, but yes. So I say more of that type of work is what's needed.
Right. And I mean, it had been a very long time since we had a transportation group that really represented the vast region. And how are you balancing out, the urban versus rural discussion that, we see popping up at, HVAC and even during the legislature when we're talking about specific priorities?
It's a great question. I think it continues to thread itself through many things, whether it's redistricting, transportation, just general politics, right? So I think what we try to find is the common threads. So transit, for example, can be a dead on arrival word, for lack of a better phrase, in many conversations with more rural legislators. But when you frame the conversation and we talk about it, is that transit is not always the hard rail transit. It's also the transit trips that are happening for seniors in more rural communities. And so I think it's finding those connection points for all of these topics that are relatable across both in both settings. And so that's kind of one example. Another might be when we're talking about, taxes, right? That's a hard word. And I wish that we could create another word in the dictionary because in some cases, some rural counties, if they know that they can do something locally and they're really working on a mobility plan, they might support something that offers them an option to raise their cap on their local sales tax and put it just towards transportation. But it's so important to have these conversations and frame them in a way that is helpful for the setting that's being represented by that legislator. We cannot have a conversation with a rural legislator about why we need commuter rail in Houston. Chances are it's just not going to fall on them as a priority. But if we say, hey, we're looking for a funding stream for transit because, oh, by the way, your county's population is aging at a rate that is significant, and your services that you're going to need to provide for your seniors community is also significant. And so this funding can also be used for that. So I really think it is finding those commonalities amongst the rural and urban settings.
Right. And I mean, that also goes to the discussion that we're seeing more and more at the state level. In the past, we haven't really talked about how multimodal transportation is approached and financed. And now that over the past couple of sessions, that's also become, something that we're seeing more. People want to see options, and how do we fund it at the state level? So do you think that's going to continue to be an issue this session, or I mean, is there so much on our plates already that maybe it's a discussion that we keep on the table for future sessions?
I think it's a discussion that we keep on the table. Some ideas that have also been floated for specific to the transit conversation. And this kind of gets back to making it cater to a locality, right? And how they choose to use the funding would be an exemption for transportation or transit to the sales tax. So in other words, instead of asking to just raise the cap across the board at the state level, I think so it's 8.25 is the cap. And in order for any municipality, county, whatever, to raise the sales tax, they would need that state enabling legislation. Well, it makes people really nervous to raise it, to offer the opportunity to raise it across the board. Again, it's not a mandate from the state. It's allowing the counties to make, or municipalities to make that decision. But if you say, well, gosh, certain entities are exempt from the cap, like transit, right? Does that allow organizations like Metro to be able to expand their services a bit more? So things like that is what has been floated about. But that is really, at this point, it's just very much a conversation. I don't see any real movement on that in this session. But it's something that if you talk to other areas across the state, it's something that's really would be welcome, quite frankly, because it would allow even rural areas to use it in a way that fits them and fits their needs, and it isn't just about the urban environment. And then I would also say, I think what's hard for the transit conversation for this session too is that there's always that, and I don't know if we ever get out of it, but it is that roads versus rails kind of mentality, and it's understandable. But I think because we know that with COVID, we've lost some of that revenue for our roads. I don't know that there's room for a conversation talking about, rails in that way for this session. But certainly the conversations are starting to say, could we exempt, the sales tax cap just for transit? It would make things a lot easier for many areas that, quite frankly, cannot pull into a service, an existing transit service at this time.
Right. So, I mean, that's kind of the discussion of, what we're looking at topically, going down the legislative session. Of course, chambers and other advocacy groups and nonprofits are trying to navigate how we're going to, stay in touch with our legislators, how we're going to advocate for our agendas and how we're going to include the community in that. And I know Carl had a question about TAG's approach to that. So Carl, you want to go ahead?
So Andrea, we've been trying to decide, we've always tagged along with you. Sorry to use tag, but tag.
I was like, no pun intended.
We tag along with you in Austin, and this year we were planning on going ourselves also, but now it looks like we may be Zoom sessions or whatever, which, like you say, maybe we can touch more people by setting up Zooms or whatever. So again, kind of your ideas on that?
Sure. So, and if you hear growling, it's not my stomach. I ate lunch. It's my dog that's here. So I just apologize in advance for that. So great question. It's something I have really, thought about extensively how we do this. Certainly the Capitol is open, right? I mean, so you or I can go up, get a COVID test, pop in, have some meetings, but the mass gatherings that we really are the hallmark of the advocacy of session, and really the enjoyable aspect of taking, a bunch of people up are really it's not feasible right now. I don't know that it won't be later in the session. It's really hard to say, but I know at least for January, February, and most of March, that's going to be pretty impossible. And so really it is still virtual. I think there are creative things that you can do. I know TAG, we are working on a video from our members and saying, thank you for keeping transportation funding. Please consider this policy, a myriad of things. And that way we can actually deliver it virtually to all the legislators in the House and the Senate. The other thing is, like I said, individual people can go up if they choose to, and a smaller group could go up and have some meetings, some targeted meetings. But it really is not everybody is on the same page right now with that, and so some are welcoming meetings and some are not. And so I do think that virtual is still your best option, and social media. Making sure that you have things like if you have your agenda, if you have something you want to send, making sure that their staff has it. And I think the staff has always been important for legislators, but I think even more so now, they are really the clearinghouse, even more so for the legislators themselves. And they have to know a lot more, I think, because they're having to navigate so much this session. So my suggestion would be keep larger things virtual. If you can and you want to and you're comfortable, certainly try to schedule if you want to go up and try to schedule some meetings. Maybe it's more like mid to late February, I think. I don't know. I feel like comfort gets a little bit better as everybody gets more comfortable with the COVID testing and all of that outside the Capitol. And then, anything else that you want to put together to kind of package your agenda and your ask, I think is super helpful. So, and good old fashioned phone calls are good too. So
they are. So Andrea, I think you just had your 8th year anniversary with TAG, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about a little what you did in Oklahoma before you came to Houston? I've always found that pretty fascinating on, you had really good success on building consensus there, and, there were quite a few wins that you had when you were in Oklahoma. And how does that translate to the work you do with TAG?
Sure. So, oh gosh, anytime I can talk about Oklahoma with a bunch of Texans, I feel like nobody can throw anything at me. So, so yes, I worked in Oklahoma prior to coming to Texas, and it's actually a really great segue from the earlier part of the conversation. So, Oklahoma City, after the bombing, the memorial bombing, they were really struggling with how to get the city back on its feet. They had reached out to, I believe it was Boeing, for them to bring their headquarters there. And Boeing sent, unbeknownst to them, sent some kind of spies to come in and look at the city and see if it was a place that their employees would want to live, work, and play. And they did not. And there wasn't anything going on after 5 o'clock downtown. There just wasn't a lot for families to do. And so they found out why they didn't choose to put their headquarters in Oklahoma City. And so they needed to come up with a plan. And so that is what was born out of that was something called MAPS, and that's Metropolitan Area Projects is what it stands for. And it started in the 90s, and it was where they chose to tax themselves a penny on the dollar. It would be for 7 years, and then it would expire or be renewed by a vote of the general public. And the initial plan was a public vote. And so it was a penny on the dollar and an estimated amount of money for about, I don't remember how many projects were in the original one, but I would say probably about 7 to 10 projects that were aimed at economic development for the city. So things like, convention center, trails, it's escaping me. It's the river that runs, that now runs Bricktown. Bricktown runs, it's a river that they actually created, or canal. And there's restaurants and things, and it's a lot of nightlife. That was part of the original MAPS. And so it was things that would really be a huge return on the investment. And so 7 years go by, lots of success. They put another list of projects out. People vote on them. It passes again. It's MAPS 2. MAPS 3 is where I came in. And that one was for a lot of sidewalks, again, trails, additions to the river to make it more of a world-renowned rowing facility, which you'll see today, and enhancements to the arena where the Thunder plays, and a whole bunch of other projects, additions to the fairgrounds. And so they just did MAPS 4. And that was called, the theme for that one was Love Your OKC. And it was all aimed at a lot of mental health and health issues and initiatives to really support the city, in addition to the kind of the physical infrastructure, right? Kind of all the other elements of infrastructure that help a city thrive. So all that to say, it was such an interesting thing for me because Oklahoma is very conservative, does not support taxes and fees. But this was so unique because it was really unique to the city, and it was a penny and it was tied to very specific projects. And their thought was that they didn't want a bond, they didn't want to create any debt. They're very much pay as you go. And it's worked really well. It's been a magnificent model for the city, and they've been asked by cities all over the nation, how they did it. And in many cases around the nation, it is that you need to go and ask for that enabling legislation at the state to be able to add a penny to your current tax. So it's a really huge success story, and I'm not even doing it all justice. So if anybody wants to explore it more, please do so, because it is a pretty phenomenal story. And I was very fortunate to be a part of it. I led the campaign for MAPS 3, coalition development. I think some of the ways in which that they were so successful is that they put a variety of projects on their list each time. And so immediately you have a very diverse coalition, right? It wasn't just transportation. For MAPS 3, one of the components was light rail, but that wasn't everything, right? It was sidewalks, hike and bike trails, and other things as well. So I think that's really key, is that when we're looking at, if we were to raise the cap on the sales tax and do a local campaign where we're tying it to something locally, it's that we would have to share that penny. If you really want to have success, you have to share that penny with something outside of just transportation. But it's worth it. It's very worth it. And like I said, they have the numbers and the happy residents to prove it. There's not anybody, that vote was very close for that first MAPS unveiling, and there's not many people nowadays that will admit that they did not vote for it the first go around. So yeah, so it's a great story about economic development, investing in infrastructure for sure.
And it's definitely, I think, food for thought for the rest of us and how we go to the public and the community and ask them to support investment in infrastructure. So I thank you so much, Andrea. I don't think we have any more questions in the queue. Good luck during the session. We'll be there with you and certainly look forward to working with you throughout session and beyond, of course. Chairman, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, so Andrea, thanks so much. It's been interesting with your presentation today, and I was raised in the Midwest, so I think your Oklahoma City success is great. And but anyway, we hopefully will maybe see you in Austin during the session. If not, maybe by Zoom or whatever. But again, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Teresa, you want to end it for us?
Absolutely. Well, thanks to everybody who joined us today. It's always great to chat with friends like Andrea French and Larry Bueller. We hope you come back for our next webinar. It's February 8th. We're hosting Phyllis Sadhoff from Port Freeport to talk about the upcoming dredging project that commences next month. And then just one more thank you to our sponsor, CRG Texas Environmental Services. Thank you so much for your support. And thanks again, Andrea, and thanks everybody. Y'all have a great week.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone.
Bye.